Hello, I'm Joe Macari. You're watching LA Carbon Fibre TV, and these are our cars. For me, there's no car that's better than the other. They're all different. Every car gives you a different emotion. Oh, that one's faster, well, so what? It really also depends on your mood. Where you are in your head and what's going to actually make you smile that day. There's certain cars obviously that tick every box, and that's what makes them extraordinary. My father loved cars, so of course I would spend my life standing on the front seat of the car, holding onto the dashboard, encouraging to go faster and faster, which in these days, they might have a bit of a dim view on health and safety with no seat belt and 100 plus miles an hour, just holding onto the dashboard so I could see over the top. Ferrari F50, for me, probably the best modern classic car of its generation. It's a car that I'm privileged to own one, and it does everything that you want a modern sports car to do. Open top, closed top, 12 cylinders, 6-speed manual, traction control was in your right foot, ABS was in your right foot. It was an analog car, and that car will go down in history of time. I mean, the engine was a detuned Formula One engine from the 1990 F1 car, from the F1 program. The car just is complete. The reality, if you have this, you don't really need anything modern classic, because it does everything. They're super reliable, and when Ferrari built this car, they threw the budget away and just built it to perfection. And for me, it's one of those cars that will just be sought after more and more forever. As much as you respect and you love the Enzo, which is next to it, but there would be no comparison in my own world. This is a one-off car in carbon, but again, you can't fault it as a motor car, but it's not an F50, and it never will be. Quite a handful to drive, it's huge power, really does get going, great noise. And don't get it wrong, if the F50 didn't exist, you'd think the Enzo was absolutely the dog's nuts. But the reality is the 50 is much more benign, nowhere near the horsepower or the ferociousness. Enzo's an animal, it's fantastic. As we look at what is extravagant as normal now, because our clients are so challenging sometimes, where they want a bespoke leather, but they want to design their own stitching and shaping, and we've done all of that before. We'll even change the interior on a car to match something that they want. We'll paint a car the colour of a girlfriend or mistress or wife's lipstick, whatever. So we've done that plenty of times. Our clients love to use their cars, and we see them put miles on the cars, use them, enjoy them, and they get the love out of them that way around. And if you drive the car, that's when you actually realise why Ferrari is the market is today. You take a 50s Ferrari, it was so far ahead of its time, they've never lost that gravitas, and that's why you drive it and you just feel like you pinch yourself. When I was a little boy learning this business, I was incredibly lucky to have a gentleman, Graham Cook, who owned Bramley Cars, and he semi-mentored me in many ways. And I used to stop there and he'd go, "Come and have a cup of tea, boy." So I used to go to his place in Bramley, have a cup of tea with him, and we would just talk. And he was very kind to me. He never advised me badly in all the time I knew him. And he told me one day, he said, "Deal with your own, then you won't get screwed, son." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, if you're dealing with the people then you can always pick up the phone and sort it." So I listened to the advice, I completely ignored it, I did my own thing, I got my arse smacked, and then realised that the old bugger was right and I was completely wrong, and it sort of stayed with me forever, ever. So then a Lamborghini Miura, this is a car that sort of melts me.
I was ready to surrender my heart to you, only you.
It's just extraordinarily beautiful. It's one of those cars that you have to just smile at it. It's stunning. To drive, it's not as sophisticated as a Ferrari. It's got big power. You'd sort of compare it with a Daytona of its era in the way it is. But every time you see a reflection in a mirror when you're driving it, you totally forgive it for the gearbox being a little clunky, because you just look at it and you go, yeah, I love you. You know, how can you not? This is particularly rare because they only made 2 cars with the winglets, because they had a habit of lifting their nose at high speed, so you wouldn't have much steering once you got into 3 figures. And so they put the little clips on the side to try and stop them lifting the nose, and they did it only to 2 cars, and this is one of the 2. For me, this is probably the most complete racing car that ever was in a GT car. Most sort of hypercars, for lack of a better word today, are not necessarily beautiful, they're impressive. And whereas the MC12 was born beautiful, it was impressive, and it did everything you wanted it to. And this is a GT1 car, there's only 10 in the world, and they are extreme. And to drive, again, another privilege. Really great car, gearbox is sensational. Everything that was done on this was basically trickled down from F1 technology through Ferrari and Maserati, where they were working together. And the car's just sublime, and for me it'll always be one of the pick of the bunches. Most underrated is a difficult question. For me, my favourite modern classic is Ferrari F50, head and shoulders above anything else. You'd also look at modern classics that have been forgotten, things like a Jaguar XJ220, great car, pretty car, disappointing noise, only had half an engine, and in reality, is that car going to stay where it is in value? No, it isn't, because the car deserves to be more loved than it is. There's always a danger when they have very low volume of cars, when those cars all find their way to collections, the market stalls because there's no one selling any. And it's actually when there's cars being sold which is what promotes the market, and most of the Jaguars are probably in private collections. The F50s, there's usually 2 or 3 on the market sometime, but never normally more than that, because when people have got them, why would they sell them? It's a 365 GT4, really underloved car. In reality, it's a sort of a 2+2 version of a Daytona, and people just don't get it, and actually really epic to drive and underloved. And I think in time it'll be a car that it's not the prettiest car, but to actually drive it's very cool. Testarossa is obviously, you know, that was Miami Vice in its purest form. These I absolutely adore. Boxers. I think there's something about these cars that just make you smile. It's almost like riding a horse that hasn't been broken in yet. It's got quite bad manners, loads of power, and you know, tries to spit you off the road every now and then, but in a nice way. 275 short nose. This is a really interesting car. It's a short nose competizione. They only made 2 right-hand drive cars, so it raced early days in Australia. The car to actually drive is magnificent. Really good power. Delicate balance is good, and it was Ferrari really got this car, was so ahead of the field when it came out. 250 Lusso, again another underappreciated car. From the point of view, it is a 250. It's great to drive, but it's quite feminine in its looks, and you have to like the softness of its features. It wasn't my biggest love. Whereas then you take the California Spider that you can't really not smile if you're human. The car's just outstanding, and this was the James Coburn car. So the history of the car is just sublime, and I feel very privileged that I got to restore it and drive it occasionally. You look at a car like this and you think, well, it's probably very beautiful but doesn't do anything well. Well, actually, it's beautiful and it does everything well. And it deserves to be the value that they are, because there's less than 40 in the world, probably only 20 covered headlight cars, and this is one of them. And, you know, and there's nobody that can dislike it. It just doesn't happen. These are valued anywhere between sort of 18 and $20 million today. They're big numbers. 275 GTS. I think this is probably one of the best convertible classic cars ever. Really, really fantastic to drive. Only 200 cars made. And they're an independent suspension car, so they drive beautifully, really nice power, make a lovely noise, and they just tick every box. It's still an awful lot of money, but it's just a car that does everything that you want it to. Ferrari Dino is arguably in the top 10 most beautiful cars that was ever born. I still describe it as the most fun you can have with no horsepower. It's not particularly fast, but it drives very flat. You know, Golf diesel will go better than it will today, but it's a Ferrari. It makes this individual noise. It's, yeah, when they're good, they're really good, and they're a car that you just want to own, and I can see why. It's beautiful. It's a monster truck with a V12 Countach engine in it. You know, it's just very cool.